Hey Algebra 2, today we're going to factor a bunch of different quadratics. The first quadratic that we're going to do has an x squared and an x term. So when everybody has a variable, we are going to factor out the GCF. That stands for the greatest common factor. So it's what is the most amount of x's that each term has? And that would be just 1. So my GCF is just x. There's an implied coefficient of 1 in front of x squared. So in this particular case, there is no number that is a GCF for this because the GCF of 1 and 4 would just be 1. All right, so we have to take x to the second divided by x. So if you want to put a little 1 exponent on these x's, you can. So if there's no exponent, that means there's an implied 1. And we did this a little while earlier, so hopefully you remember when you divide variables, we are going to subtract their exponents. So x to the second divided by x to the first, I'm going to go 2 minus 1, which is 1. There's an invisible 1 in front of that, so 4 divided by 1 is 4, and x divided by x, they cancel each other out. And then to fully factor it, you just have to take whatever the GCF is and bring it down in front of your other two terms there. So you have to remember that when it's written out like this is called standard form. And when you have two terms being multiplied, this is called factor form. And so standard form and factor form are the equivalent of one another. So in order for the factor form to be the equivalent, you have to have this x out in front, because if you distribute it, you have to get back what you started with. Let's try another one. So I have an x squared and an x. I have two terms, and they both have an x. So this is a GCF kind of a problem. So we're going to start with the number. What is the biggest number that will divide into 16 and 12 evenly? And the biggest one will be a 4. So the 4 is the number part of your GCF. And then you look at your variables. And for the variable part, it's always the smallest exponent that I have. So you have to bring your GCF down in front. And now we're going to divide. You have to remember that numbers divide and your variables subtract. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. X to the second divided by x to the first, so you go 2 minus 1 is 1. Bring down your subtraction sign. Do it again for this part. 12 divided by 4 is 3. And your x's cancel each other out. So when you factor out the GCF, it's just like reverse distribution. So let's distribute and make sure that we get what we started with. 4x times 4x. So 4 times 4 is 16, and x times x. So when you multiply variables, you add exponents. I get x to the second. And then when you take 4x times negative 3, so 4 times negative 3 is negative 12, and then you just have to tag on the x. The next kind of factoring that you might have to do will be to factor a trinomial. So a trinomial means that it has three terms. And it is always in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. This is called standard form. So a is always x squared's coefficient, b is always x's coefficient, and c is your constant term. If there's no number in front of one of your terms, that means it's just 1. So we did some of these at the beginning of the year. So when I have to factor a trinomial, I make an Acb chart. Sometimes I've heard it called a product sum chart. So to get this AC, you have to take your A term times your C term. So in this case, we're taking 1 times 64, which is 64. And your B term, you just write down X's coefficient, which is 16. So on this side, we have to find numbers that multiply and equal 64. So that would be 1 and 64, 2 and 32, 4 and 16, and 8 and 8. On the right side, you write down what do they add up to. 1 plus 64 adds up to 65. Well, that's not my winner. I'm looking for the one that adds up to 16. That's going to be my winner. 2 plus 32 is 34. Nope. 4 plus 16 is 20. Nope. 8 plus 8 is 16. There's my winner. So we like it when A is just 1 because whatever these numbers are right here, those are my factors. So this factors as x plus 8, x plus 8. And in this case, we're all done. This one, okay, so it's also a trinomial. There's no number in front of x squared, it's 1. So when I make my Acb chart, A times C is negative 24, and it has to add up to negative 5. So my factors of 24 are 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. We can't leave it like this because 1 times 24 is positive 24. And I need factors of negative 24. So that means one of these numbers is going to have to be a negative. It has to add up to negative 5. So if it has to add up to a negative, that means that the bigger number is going to have to be your negative. So 1 plus 24 adds up to negative 23. That's not my winner. 2 plus negative 12 is negative 10. Nope. 3 plus negative 8 is negative 5. Yes, that's my winner. And then that last one adds up to negative 2. All right, so these numbers right here, those are my factors. So this factors as x plus 3 and x minus 8. So you have to be careful when you have a negative right here. Because if you have x squared plus 5x minus 24, if I do one little thing, if I change that term to a plus 5, then that means that my negative is going to have to go on the smaller number. So this one would actually factor as x minus 3 and x plus 8. So these two problems are very similar, but the middle term, one of them adds up to -5 and one of them adds up to +5. So you have to pay attention to what your sign is so that you put your plus and your minus on the correct term. All right, now we are reviewing stuff from Algebra 1, and we have not done any of these in Algebra 2 yet this year. We're still factoring a trinomial, but now a isn't 1 anymore. So a is 5, your b is -13, and your c is 6. We're going to start off the exact same way. We still make an Acb chart to find our factors. So we take 5 times 6, so I need factors of 30 that add up to 13. All right, so let's list our factors of 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. All right, so 30 is a positive number. A positive times a positive adds up to a positive. If I add these, this adds up to 31. Well, that's not adding up to a negative number. So if your AC is positive, but it adds up to a negative number, what you have to remember is that a negative times a negative also equals a positive. So that must mean that all of these terms are actually negative. So these are also factors of positive 30. Now let's see what they add up to. -2 plus -15 adds up to -17. No, let's fix that one. That's -31. -3 and -10, that adds up to -13. -5 plus -6 adds up to -11. All right, so that one is my winner. Okay. We're going to do this first one in what I call factor by grouping. So whatever your factors are right here, we're going to replace the middle term with them. So I'm going to keep my 5x squared. Replace that with minus 3x and minus 10x and plus 6. My first and my last term come down. There were no changes that occurred. I just got creative and I found a different way. Instead of writing -13x, I wrote -3 and -10. That still adds up to -13. So in factor by grouping, what you do is you group the first two terms and the last two terms. And now we're going to factor out the GCF. So if you refer to problems 1 and 2, that's what we're going to do. So we're going to pretend that those other two terms don't exist right now. What is the GCF of 5x squared and -3x? That would be an x. What is the GCF of -10x and 6? Okay, so 10 and 6 are both even numbers, and whatever the sign of this third term is, you always have to factor that out. So just like we did above, we're going to bring down our GCF, and now we're going to divide. 5x squared divided by x is 5x. -3x divided by x is -3. Close your parentheses. Bring down your -2. Bring down the GCF again. And now divide. So be super careful because you're dividing by a negative. -10x divided by -2 is positive 5x. 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3. So to finish this out, these two terms should basically always match. We're basically factoring out a GCF again. So I have this 5x minus 3 and another 5x minus 3. So I have one factor that's 5x minus 3, and your other factor is these two terms out in front, your GCF. And then you have x minus 2 goes in your other set of parentheses. And that's how you factor a trinomial using factor by grouping. A couple years ago, I learned this other way, and we're going to do number 6 a slightly different way, and it's called slide and divide. So this is a strategy that I use when A is not 1. So when you slide, you take your A term, and we're going to move it to the back. And when I move it to the back, I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to ignore the 3 here, and I'm just going to write down x squared. Your middle term never changes. It's minus 2x. And then you're going to take the 3 times negative 5, which is negative 15. So I feel like when you have a trinomial, and A is just 1, these are a whole lot easier than what I just did. So let's make an Acb chart. Now A is just 1, so A times C, so I need factors of negative 15 that add up to negative 2. So I can either use 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. I know I'm using 3 and 5 because they're 2 units apart. And it has to add up to negative 2. So that means the 5 has to be, have the negative on it. So this factors as x plus 3, x minus 5. The dangerous part of this is you have to remember to turn around and divide. So whatever your A term is, we're going to divide both of these number parts of your factors by that A term. So I'm dividing them both by 3 right now. If they divide and simplify down, then we're just going to simplify it. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. So this is x plus 1. 5 divided by 3, that does not divide evenly. So if it doesn't divide evenly, you take this denominator and we're going to slide it up in front of that x. So that term becomes 3x minus 5. We have to do it this way. You can't just leave it as x plus 3x minus 5, because you have to remember that from factor form to standard form, they have to be equivalent. If you didn't move the 3 in front and you take x times x, that's only x squared. But I have to have a 3x squared. So if I check this one out, I take x times 3x, that is 3x squared, so that's good. And then if you multiply the last terms, 1 times negative 5 is negative 5. So you can always FOIL and check to make sure that you get what you started with. And I'm going to hit the pause button and come back and do the back side.